Hi, good evening, and a very warm welcome to each and everyone on behalf of the National Centre for the Performing Arts. We're honored and absolutely delighted to host the Mumbai launch of the book Bapji, Maharaja of Marwar Jodhpur, the King Who Would Be Man, about none other than His Highness Maharaja Gaj Singh Ji II, co-authored by Mr. Yogi Ved and Mr. Aman Nath. Today, they will be in discussion with Mr. Asad Lalji for what promises to be a very engaging evening. So you're very welcome here. It seems most fitting to have this discussion at the NCPA as part of our Page to Stage initiative, which gives literature a stage and a forum for such discussions. Founded on a dream over 55 years ago to promote, propagate, and preserve the arts, the NCPA hosts performances across music, dance, and theatre. It also boasts of a photo gallery, 2 libraries with a rare collection of records and books, as well as a rich archive with priceless treasures, interestingly, including a great collection of books and recordings on the folk music of Rajasthan. In addition to this, NCPA hosts education and outreach programs ensuring accessibility to the arts. In short, it plays the role of a nationwide ecosystem that sustains artistic expression and cultural continuity. You see the parallel. The royalty and the arts have always shared a strong relationship. Despite changing times, Maharaja Gaj Singh Ji II has continued to strengthen his patronage to the arts and the culture of Rajasthan. A founder of the Mehrangarh Museum Trust and a chief patron for events like Jodhpur Riff and the World Sacred Spirit Festival, he promotes Marwar music, arts, and festivals, playing a significant role in the propagation and preservation of the arts. Similar to the NCPA, a keeper of culture, including built heritage, intangible heritage, water conservation, environmental efforts, and numerous social causes, he plays more than the role of cultural conscience keeper. So thank you. It really is an honor to have you here today. I'd like to welcome on stage Saz, which is Sadiq, Asin, and Zakir Khan, a folk trio Thank you. While they set up, I'll just tell you a little bit about them. They're a folk trio hailing from the Langar community of Rajasthan. The Saz trio preserve and subvert the folk music that inspired them by both reviving and reimagining traditional songs, as well as creating new music within the idiom and in collaboration with musicians from different genres. It was, in fact, at the Jodhpur Riff that their pioneering music was spotted and then nurtured by the festival director, Divya Bhatia ji, very much in keeping with the vision of the chief patron of the festival, His Highness Maharaja Gaj Singh Ji II. When they were releasing their first album, it was His Highness who unveiled the album cover, which was an artwork painted by a friend of his. And hence, their playing here tonight is particularly meaningful because he's witnessed and supported their journey, as he has of so many musicians across Rajasthan. Without further ado, let's put our hands together for Saz, who present Rang-e-Thar, Colors of the Desert. Thank you.
ओम आगनी सभी को नमस्कार। और आज हम जो सुनाना चाह रहे हैं, जो गाना है, गाने का नाम है कैलूड़ी, और हमारे मारवाड़ के हुकुम बाप जी के लिए ये गाना प्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं। नेक्स्ट जो गाना है, गाने का नाम है आकड़ली फरूके ढोलो घरे का दाव। तो आज मेरी आँख फड़क रही है कि मेरा जो पति है वो घर पे आ रहा है, तो उसके बारे में ये गाना है। अखिड़ली परू की ढोलो करानी पधारे थाने जोए जोए जियो। अखिड़ली परू की ढोलो करानी पधारो थाने जोए जोए जियो। आज रे हरियाणा बनी रहो, आज रे शौकीन जीविना।
अखिड़ली परू की ढोलो करानी पधारो थाने जोए जोए जियो रे बदिले निरखे निरखे जियो।
आज रे हरियाणा बना रे, आज रे शौकीन जीविना। अखिड़ली परू की ढोलो करानी पधारो थाने जोए जोए जियो रे बदिले निरखे निरखे जियो।
Thank you very much for that. I'm truly speechless with beautiful music. I hope everyone enjoyed that thoroughly. And now, please may I invite Maharaja Gad Singh Ji II and Maharani Hemlata Raje Ji. May I also invite both the co-authors, Mr. Yogi Ved and Mr. Amarnath, Malika Sarabhai Ji, co-founder and publisher Mappin, and renowned classical dancer who has, of course, graced our stages on many occasions, Mr. Asad Lalji, CEO of Avid Learning and curator of Royal Opera House, Mumbai, and our very own Dr. Sujata Jadhav, head of Libraries Documentation Center at NCPA and curator of this wonderful initiative, Page to Stage. Please do come on stage to launch the book. Thank you. Thank you very much for that special moment. Please may I invite to the stage Maharaja Ji, Mr. Yogi Ved, Mr. Amarnath, and Mr. Asad Lalji for what promises to be a very interesting discussion. I'm going to hand over the stage to them.
Good evening. Thank you, Dia, Sujata, Nakul, and the NCPA Page to Stage initiative for hosting this discussion. It's very special to be here. This is an institution that has shaped my early engagement with the arts from the 1983 Rodin show I saw here onwards. And having lived in New York for many years, down the road from Lincoln Center, I've often thought of NCPA as Bombay's equivalent. Fittingly, the Tata Theatre, this very venue, was the place for my first Avid program, which was Anil Dharkar's Tata Lit Live. Congratulations to Bipin, Malvika, and the whole Mappin team, publishers of some of the finest illustrated books on Indian art and culture, and to Yogi and Aman for this landmark publication. Thank you, Aman, for the invitation to moderate this discussion. I've been a fan of Aman's work for almost 3 decades, and I have copies of almost all his large format illustrated books. But sadly to say, I've only been to a handful of his 32 magnificent properties. So if I do a good job here, that's going to change by the end of the evening. So thank you to the audience for being here in such large numbers, and now to the task at hand. There is a particular kind of story India tells about its royals. It usually involves jewels, elephants, and a world that ended somewhere in the 1947. It is told with nostalgia or with suspicion, rarely with nuance. Tonight, we're in the presence of a book and the people behind it that refuses both. The King Who Would Be Man is not a celebration of monarchy. It is not a eulogy of the lost world. It is something more compelling. It is the story of a man who was handed an identity at the age 4, long before he could understand it, and who then spent the next 7 decades forging a legacy. Not just the palaces, titles, or traditions, but responsibility. The weight of being someone an entire people look towards. At the heart of the story, many choose retreat, a quieter life, behind high walls, letting the world move on without them. Maharaja Gat Singh II of Mahabharat Jodhpur did not. He stepped into democracy, into diplomacy, into institution building, tourism, and the fight for a language spoken by millions, yet without an official recognition. He did not choose irrelevance. He chose responsibility. And to his people, he remained simply Bapji. To tell the story, we have two chroniclers who came at it from different directions. Together, they've created something that is part biography, part social history, and part mediation on what duty looks like when no one is enforcing it anymore. I have the august pleasure of asking these three gentlemen who share a bond some questions this evening, and to quote 120 years of friendship, trust, and fondness among this trinity. So let's begin. I'd like to ask you the first question. I'd like to pause on the word which carries affection and reverence, Bapji, revered father. You were 4 years old when your father, Maharaja Hanwant Singh, passed away. The Rathors called you Bapji, the same name your father carried, so you would grow into it, not just inherit it. 7 decades later, you've carried it with such grace and trust. What does being Bapji mean to you today?
I remember having a nickname, Muku, or Mukul, as I was called. But my maternal uncle, Maharaja of Drangadra, was very adamant, told my mother, I don't want him stuck with a nickname, like many of his fellow princes. And so he said Bapji is the appropriate word. Bapji itself is a very familiar honorific and a term of endearment used in Rajasthan. So, especially in feudal families, the male members of the families are known as Bapji. Like in my family, my father was known as Bada Bapji. And my uncle was known by so-and-so Bapji, Hazur Bapji, Pichla Bapji, by their name Bapji. Since I was the only one, my mother started calling me Bapji. And as a result, everybody else called me Bapji as well. So it was both an honorific, which carried with it a responsibility, and a term of endearment for me. And that's how I look at it.
And 7 decades later? And 7 decades later?
7 decades later, well, Aman has got it to stick now in a big way. And so I'm known as Bapji by all of Jodhpur, all my friends in India and abroad. And, well, I treat it with honor and with affection. And I hope that I can live up to the expectations.
Thank you for that. Aman needs to jump in, as usual.
I think that, the words like this, which are become generic. When we say Bapu, there's only one Bapu for India. When we say Gurudev, we mean Tagore. And I think that this book will play a certain role in making you the generic Bapji. Yes.
But talking about this book, Jodhpur Umaid Bhawan, the Maharaja of Palaces, is published in 2008, also by Aman. Do share the chance encounter that became the impetus of this book. And why publish this book now? I mean, there was no landmark occasion like an 80th or a 100th celebration. And how was it working with Aman on this book versus the previous edition?
Well, over a period, many people have always told me, write your biography or get somebody else to write it. And since I'm no writer myself, I didn't take it seriously. But at the same time, what actually happened was Aman's biography was being written by Yogi. And Yogi was introduced to me because he wanted Yogi to talk to me about him and our friendship. So we met. And that's how this whole thing evolved. And of course, I've known Aman and Francis before that for a long time, and they've always had a love affair with Jodhpur, hence the Maharaja book of palaces. And he's always had in mind to do another book on Jodhpur. He's a master in these large format books. He told me to call it large format book, not a coffee table book. And the Jaipur book, they're all legendary. And the one Dome over Delhi, the Tata book, these are all very important books. So we got talking, and they said, why not do it?
No, I think Bill Gates' story.
Gates Senior.
Yes. You tell the Bill Gates story.
You
You know, the Bill Gates once came, and with his son, with his father and his sisters, and they were having drinks, and he looked at the book, the Maharaja book, and he lingered across it for a long time. And he said that this needs to be followed up. And that stayed in my mind.
Wonderful, and you have a wonderful book here. Aman, I'm going to go to you. Rudyard Kipling wrote The Man Who Would Be King, about a common man's hunger to rise above and become royalty. Your book flips it entirely, a king choosing to walk among his people, earning his place not through power, but through presence. What made this reversal the heart of the story?
Well, Babji and I began our journey many years ago, disco dancing at the Tabela at the Oberoi.
We read that in the book too.
No, but they haven't read it yet. Yeah. So we actually, go up and down all of society. As Judge Babji, he's in a village without water one day, and he's with the topmost people. So the whole idea was that in the 60s and 70s, the Maharaja became a sort of mascot, because Air India, used it as a mascot. It was not with any ridicule. It was, done because it was something that India had to offer, that the world was interested in. And I think that moment passed. So the moment when, if you now had a picture of Babji, and there are several, wearing all his jewels, I'm not sure that it would evoke the same sentiment that this book does. I do believe that India is a very wise nation and evolved people, and there, I think, majority of the audience could be included in that, understand that nothing belongs to us, that we are custodians of whatever we hold. So when you talk about 32 forts and palaces, of course, none of those belong to me, because they're going to outlive me. So I believe that if you touch something in your life and improve it, then you have the right to inherit it. Otherwise, you don't. If you could sell it off. So Babji is an exemplary example of that, because one chapter in the book says, inheriting white elephants. So I know, when you look at Umaid Bhawan as one of the best hotels in the world and so on, when it was inherited, it was not so. It was dark, dingy. How much staff do you need? And the Privy Purses had gone. So it was really challenging for the family and for ladies, because he had two elder sisters, a mother, to get that. And that he's been able to do this cross-current with everybody working against his interests, that is admirable. That's what.
Right. We will come to that. There's a whole question on that. But Yogi, we're going to go to you.
About time, thank you.
Yeah, with Aman, you would have to, you all know each other for 68 years, right?
Right.
So you wrote a deeply personal book about your friend Aman Nath, titled A Remarkable Friendship. That's when you met Babji. And now the two of you have turned around and written this book together. While many significant biographies are published posthumously to provide a complete overview of a person's life, here you are two authors working together to interpret the life of a third person who's a public figure and a close personal acquaintance. So how did this process of shaping a singular narrative voice of this book unfold, and what were some of the creative and intellectual challenges?
Well, process of unification germinated 68 years ago. And that's going back a long time. And Asad, you remember the chicken and egg riddle, right? But unlike that riddle, Aman and I both came first in the kindergarten, and we got the academic prize in school. So I feel that if our buddhi, our intellect brought us together, it was our bhagya, our destiny, that for next 6 decades we crisscrossed each other's paths. And you know, we come from similar backgrounds. We have the same family values. We've grown up with the same education. So all that was used as an advantage in bringing out this very human story. And then you know the subject very well. You interact with the family and you know them. And these are the nuances which archival documents seldom throw up. So, you know, the challenge was really never there. We just enjoyed it. It was a cakewalk, I think, you know, and it was teamwork. But the mantra is to keep the ego out. So Aman and I know our strengths. Now, Aman's strength is a generosity of spirit, which so many people have benefited from, and an incredible discipline, focus, strength. Now, Aman, later on, you can trumpet some of mine. So, you know, all that helped. And yeah, so this was the genesis of the book.
So there was no disagreement, so hence the unified
You know, that's
narrative.
the joke in the family, that Aman and I have never had a disagreement. I mean, leave alone an argument.
Your whole family is sitting there, so yes or
There,
no, is
but,
that
you know,
correct?
it's a bit unhealthy, let me tell you, because
I
nothing...
witnessed some of it yesterday, so I know. Bapchi, I'm going to go back to you. In 1970, you returned after 14 years in England, Oxford educated, worldly, shaped completely by a different world. And then there were millions of people waiting alongside to greet you. You changed out of your Western clothes. Now, Aman has told me that you look like Elvis Presley, though I did not find that in the book, into your Rajasthani dress. And you said, to quote, "The train journey was that momentous one that changed the tracks of my life." You abandoned your plans to go and study architecture in the US. So when did you realize, without doubt, that this is where you belonged?
Well, in all the years, 14 years, I call it my 14 saal ka banwas. I was in England and I enjoyed it. I had to come and go, and it was a game I used to play of being an Englishman when I was there and being an Indian when I was here. But coming back was another experience. And when I came back, my mother had asked the palace organization to have a small reception for me. But that's it snowballed out of control, and it was taken over by the citizens of Jodhpur. So when I returned to Delhi, I got a call from my mother. I said, "You have to stay back in Delhi for a couple of days because they're not ready for you." So I said, "What do you mean they're not ready for me?" He said, "They're organizing a reception for you, and you have to come by train, not by plane. And I'm sending the saloon." In those days, we had the privilege of our own private saloon, because we'd still not been derecognized in 1970, which we could attach to the regular train. "And I'm sending the saloon for you, and you will come in that." So I came, and the moment we entered the territory of Marwar at 5 o'clock in the morning, it was winter in November, quite cold. Small crowd started assembling, and it grew and grew and grew until I reached the station of Jodhpur at 12 o'clock exactly. And the whole place, there wasn't a place to walk. You'll see the photograph in the book. And it took me from there to go to the temple through the old city, which they decided I had to go through, and to my grandmother's home, Raikabag, and back to Umaid Bhawan, where my mother was. 12 hours. And that really shook me in many ways. It was awe-inspiring. It was, in a way, frightening, because I realized that there's a lot of expectation. At the same time, I realized that there's a lot of love and affection, and I also realized that they don't know me. It's something that beyond that. It is my ancestors, my father, grandfather, the respect I'm getting is because of that. And that is when I really, and I also, it was on the eve of derecognition, when the rest of the country was downgrading and or at least the political tendency was to downgrade and look down on the Indian princes. Here was a whole population that had actually come out. And it gave me a lot of courage and a lot of strength. And then that is when I realized that this is my calling. And of course, I'd always known that since the beginning, but I realized that I have to be here, I have to remain here, I have to connect.
And I believe that journey normally takes about 15 minutes to 12 hours.
Yeah.
So that was a symbolic kind of awakening. Aman, the title suggests the king who would be man, that becoming fully human is greater ambition than being king. In post-independence India, royalty is often caricatured as hostile to democracy. Why was it important for you to tell a story that dignifies a Maharaja without romanticizing the institution?
When you become a democracy, you know, and the titles have been made redundant for whatever reason, for populist reasons and so on, we cannot live time backwards. I think we just have to look ahead. And I think the good thing about Bapji was that he understood that. He understood that. And I didn't finish the last time that, you know, if you were today playing the Maharaja, and some do actually, it's good pictures for magazines, but it's not connect with reality. And India is a very wise country. So I think that kind of wisdom, perhaps because Bapji had been away, and when you look at yourself from a distance, you get a new perspective, which he certainly got. And having got that, there's been pictures of him in every magazine in the world wearing those jewels in the 60s, 70s. It was fashionable. There were books like that, you know, and Cartier did exhibitions and the vintage cars and rallies and all that. But it becomes out of sync. Today, when people talk of, I mean, we are in hotels, luxury is important. But for India, experiential tourism is also very important because, you know, when you actually set up luxury and get Miss India to sit in a jacuzzi with rose petals and make a photograph and say, you know, come to this luxury hotel, the reality is so different because by the time you can afford to pay 7 lakhs for your suite, or is it more than that, you know? Yes. You know, you become 60, and if you have a mirrored bathroom and you take off all your clothes, I think you want to drown yourself.
I think we need to keep this PG-13, and All India Flower Association will object to you. But you know, when I first met, one of the first meetings with Aman, I met him at JLF when people mistook him to be Hamid Karzai. And he sat and complained to me. I mean, we barely knew each other at that time. And then when I was talking to him the other day, he said, now people mistake him as a Maharaja because of the number of palaces he has in his portfolio. So, am I correct?
Not entirely, you know, I mean, I'm also on the same trail, you know, I keep saying I'm a fakir and they say, well, you know, that's not how it is, but Bapji is a fakir, you know, he plays that role, yeah.
All right. Yogi, we'll go back to some voice of reason. You know, and I'm going to quote a lot from the book because I love these little quotes that every chapter starts with. So it says in a game of chess, it is the queen who saves the king. In this book, 4 out of the 14 chapters about the women of the Rathore clan. And while researching the book, you spoke to many people, both inside and outside the family, including Maharani Sahib Hemlata Raje. And her stories revealed a mischievous curiosity of life beyond the walls of the palace. So who is your favorite of the resilient Rathoranis and why? And what did these conversations reveal to you about Maharani Hemlata Raje's personality and her partnership with Bapji?
Oh, that's a long one and not a fair one because one of the women is sitting right here in front of me. So you're going to get me into trouble. You know, we cover 7 women. We chose 7 who had a direct connect with Bapji. His grandmother, Badan Kanwar, then his mother, Krishna Kumari, and his two sisters, Chandresh Kumari, Shailesh Kumari, then Hemlata ji, his better half, best half, and then his daughter Shiv Ranjani and daughter-in-law Gayatri. So it's very difficult. They all were very strong women, resilient Rathornis, as we've named the chapter. But my favorite, and the one who stands out for me, since it's a personal choice, and I think Hemlata ji will agree with me, was Krishna Kumari, his mother. You know, and I'll tell you why. She is a princess from Dharangdhara in Gujarat. At the age of 16, she gets married to the 20-year-old Hanwant Singh. She bears 3 children, Chandresh, Shailesh, and then the much-awaited, much-needed heir, Gaj Singh, who inherits her soulful eyes and much more. After 9 years of marriage, at age 25, she is widowed. With no time to mourn, she is made the regent of Marwar Jodhpur. But she shows remarkable foresight and astuteness in packing off the girls to Pune and Babji to England to save them from the, you know, the Ji Hukum culture and the court shenanigans. And that I thought was just remarkable. Then when her father-in-law, Umed Singh, suddenly passes away in 1947, her mother-in-law, Badan Kanwar, they are in Parda, these women. She says, you have to step out and stand for elections. That was such a bold move. And this lady goes out, speaks to the people, and her slogan of, you know, Samay Badla, Sambandh Nahi Badle, struck a chord with everybody. And of course, that backlog of respect and all, and she wins handsomely, and she's the Member of Parliament from 1971 to 77. And, you know, that for me was truly shining, you know. She played the role of both parents with aplomb, you know. So her life was tough. And Babji has said it many times that she was the one who enthused and encouraged him to come back to his roots, his culture, his people. And so that she was a obvious choice, I think.
Yeah. I want to. Thank you. No, can I speak about Hemlata ji?
Yeah, I'll also say something, but you go ahead.
You say it first.
Okay.
They finish each other's sentences.
Yes. No, the thing is that I've met her several times over the past couple of years, and of course, someone knows her for much longer. She has the official side, which is elegance and charm in performing her royal duties, you know, always by his side. But there is a flip side to her, which we found so interesting. She's a live wire. She has a fantastic sense of humor, and often naughty one. And she related such interesting pranks she would perform, right from her school days, college days, and when she was a Maharani, you know. So there is one which stands out, which I think people will enjoy, that she once steps out of the palace walls just to see how people live and what their condition is, and to have fun also. She wears a burqa. She stuffs these pillows inside to look pregnant. She hops onto a tonga, a horse carriage, and she goes to the bazaar and says, "Mujhe paise de do, maine Pakistan jana hai, mera pati chhod ke chala gaya." So to, you know, catch a husband who's abandoned her, which I thought was just remarkable, you know. But I found a solemn side to her when their son has this horrific polo accident, Shivraj. She believes it was her faith, her dedication, her spirituality, and the prayers of the people which actually brought him back from the brink. So now, Aman, you can add to that.
I think it deserves a clap. You know, it's easy to say that, you know, he is a man, but he is the Maharaja also. And when you are at the top of a triangle or the apex of something, there's always a risk because there's a coterie, there's a darbar, there's sycophants, and so on. So it's only human and natural that you get affected by that. And I think that as a teamwork, Hemlata ji has a very good take. I mean, she's a great judge of humans. So she, I think, guides him and he listens to her. And that teamwork is very important. Don't you think so?
And earlier in the evening, I was hearing her talk about her passion for hockey with Aarti, which was also a very interesting story. Bapti, I'm going to go back to you. You arrived in Trinidad in 1978 as a 29-year-old High Commissioner, arguably one of the youngest and the most unusual credentialed diplomats India had sent anywhere, a Maharaja. How did you connect with the people in Trinidad? And what did that posting teach you about India that you could not have learned staying here?
That, I have to say, was an episode in my life. It was very unexpected and very welcome, because after the grim period of the 70s that I had to go through with all the changes and everything else, it was getting away, doing something different. And in a young and vibrant country, with my young children with me, my wife and my mother also there. It was, being a small country, it had a very significant connect with India, because 45% of the population are of Indian origin, and consisting of course, majority Muslims, Hindus, but Muslims and Christians also. And the one thing was that they formed a solid group there, politically and culturally. And culturally they were very strong, and they looked to India in a very big way. And it was very difficult for an Indian High Commissioner to walk the tightrope, because the tightrope was that they are not your people. They are actually citizens of Trinidad. So you're not their High Commissioner. You're High Commissioner to the Indian patriots who were there, who were a small number. And so, but they looked at you there. So you had to balance that with the rest of it. And having my mother there was a great help. Because anything that was personal or religious or anything like that, I would send them to my mother. And she'd take care of them. But what, to answer your question, what comes across very strongly is that the Indian mentality, no matter how many years, 150 years they went, they connect with India, they connect with Indian culture, and the way they function was so strong. And that made me think that we, as a nation, have a position and a role to play in the world.
Thank you for that. Aman, when the subject of a biography is someone you have known personally for so many years, now I have 1972, your disco dancing days at the Oberoi, how do you negotiate the delicate balance between affection and historical accuracy?
I don't think, just like Yogi said, we didn't have an issue. Babji never said to me, you can't say this, you can say this. Even when I wrote the book for Ratan Tata, people said, you can't say that somebody committed suicide because there was a finance director. So, they would say, you can't. And he said, it's Aman's book. I trust him. So I think he trusted me. You said, you trust me reasonably well. Okay.
But didn't your master's in history or your educational background help you at all, or no?
No, it did. I did my master's in history. But to answer it obliquely, there's this fabulous Indian poet who lived in the US called A.K. Ramanujan, and he wrote a book of poems called Relatives. And the first poem, the title poem, is dedicated to his wife. And he says, what keeps us apart after years of marriage is our unshared childhood. But in this case, we had a shared childhood and we had a shared childhood. So we were not separated. There was nothing, I think, Babji should say this, that was out of sync, that I would ridicule him, because, he lived through very difficult times.
Thank you for that. Yogi, Zubaida Begum has been often remembered through controversy, legend and cinema, rather than through documented history. While researching the book, what did you discover about her and her real story, and what aspects of her life surprised you the most?
You always ask me the toughest questions. Zubaida has been made out to be an enigma, which really she wasn't. It was a very open relationship with Hanman Singh. he liked her. She sang and danced at a royal family wedding, one of their weddings, and he liked her. And then his mother said, look, if you really like her, then the tradition was to place gold in her feet, which they did, which meant that she was booked, you know. So that was the story. But we all love scandals, don't we, Asad? And I have a confession to make. When Aman and I were researching and going through this, I said, let's find something messy, dirty about Babji, you know, that he'll have to offer us hush money, and maybe if we publish it...
See that understanding he was talking about.
Yeah. And if we publish it, sales would soar. But sadly, you know, we found nothing.
The story is not true, actually.
Well, yeah, so, you know, she's been made out to be more. And I think it's that scandal that everybody feels. Any house, leave it a royal house, there has to be some scandal, something hidden which they want to talk about. So it was more that, you know, I mean, we have spoken to Babji very openly about this, about the relationship. But then she dies in this plane crash and leaves a 6-month-old son, Tutu Bana, who's brought up by his mother as her own. You know, when his mother collapses, when the body of her husband is brought at night, she doesn't know. There's a silence. She says, I used to walk to the window in my room and look at the dome first to see the flag, the Pachranga, you know, the Jodhpur flag. And that day I said it's not flying. Then her cousins are there and they are quiet, but they break down. And then she finds out she collapses for 4 hours or something. And it's all written. This is documented. But the minute she comes to, you know what she says? Where is Tutu Bana? She has 3 of her own children. But it is that love for her husband because he has half her blood, his blood, the father's blood. So these were the women, you know, and really strong. And this is Zubeda for you. Yeah.
Babji, you know, you fought both in Parliament and outside for Rajasthani to be included in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. Why does linguistic inclusion matter so much to you?
You see, it's the root of culture. And today in Rajasthan, we pride ourselves on our culture. We talk about cultural events like we saw today, our music, that is also Rajasthani. And there are different forms of Rajasthani. And we do all that. At the same time, we don't recognize our language. With the language comes everything. In language comes culture, comes values, comes the way you present yourself, and all the fineries that Rajasthan has comes from the language, the refinement. And it's a very rich language. There are 12 volumes of a dictionary written by one gentleman. And so it's much richer than Hindi or any other language. It's recognized by the Sahitya Academy long before as the mother of the desert languages, is Maru Bhasha. It's known as Maru Bhasha, mother of present-day Rajasthani, Gujarati, Sindhi, all come from that. So it is our root, and it's what makes Rajasthan strong, what we believe in. And it's very sad that it hasn't happened, because what happens now are the parents want their children to learn Hindi and English, and they stop speaking the local language at home. And
I think that's happening in many parts of India. But Yogi mentioned the Pancharanga flag has 5 colors representing the 5 communities, the 5 faiths, and the 5 ways of belonging under one roof. And we've often said the king has no caste. And in today's India, where identity and caste are increasingly used to divide, how do you actively hold the 5-color promise together in Marwar?
well, in Marwar, definitely, and in Jodhpur city, of course, all over, there is a great sense of binding, a great sense of oneness, of belonging to the Marwar culture. And the Apnapan, they call it, Apnayat. And so people in Jodhpur love each other wherever they are. And they are spread all over the world. And they will welcome each other with open arms, regardless of who you are, whether you're a king or a pauper. If you go abroad and you find a rich Rajasthani, he will welcome you into his home. And that is the strength of the culture. And there, again, that is the language. What mind of the recognition comes from the language. So we have a very strong communal harmony. And we have a group that actively looks into this. So there have been very few communal incidents in Jodhpur. And particularly during the time of partition, my father and grandfather saw to it that Indians, Muslims and Hindus crossed over the border safely. And we had the Jodhpur Railway at that time. The Jodhpur Railway had a line going into Hyderabad, Sindh. That was the safest crossing in those days. Even though my grandfather appealed to the people, saying that Hindus and Muslims are like my two eyes. Don't leave, you'll be safe here. But some people left, but they retained that connection. There are people in Karachi who still call themselves Marwar Muslim Society. And they're in touch with me, and they bring out a calendar. They wanted photographs of my grandfather, they wanted photographs of the fort, which they bring out. So that's the strength.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to go into this whole area of heritage and tourism. In 1978, before leaving for Trinidad, you made the decision that would change the landscape of Indian heritage tourism. You signed a professional hotel management company to run Umaid Bhawan. At the time, very few royals thought that way. Was this a pragmatic survival decision, or did you already have a sense that heritage handled well can become its own form of legacy? I mean, he's briefly mentioned the white elephants. I'm not going to go there. But yeah.
No, it's a combination of factors. Firstly, as Aman already mentioned, the experience of being in Europe and looking from outside inwards, one saw things in a different way. And I realized that there is so much culture and there's so much history, architecture that needs to be preserved the way they've done in Europe. And they are modern democratic countries. They're not backward, like we were made out to be here. But yet they were able to protect their heritage in a practical way. So that was one. Secondly, as you rightly say, there was a need of the hour. Because as Aman said, everything was basically under dust sheets. And we had to look after our staff, we had to look after buildings. The other assets, the land had been taken away, the taxation was very heavy. There was no liquidity, but we had these white elephants. So it seemed like the obvious thing to do.
Yeah, and I must butt in. The first time I met him for writing for my book on Aman, we are sitting in Umaid Bhawan, and he says, "Will you believe when I tell you that we have seen poverty?" And I'm sitting in this opulent 347-room palace with portraits and, bric-a-brac. And I said, my God, has he lost this? This man has lost it. He's saying he's poor. But he's just explained what they went through. That was tough.
Aman, you've restored ruins of Neemrana Fort in 1986 that turned what many consider the founding act of change and use and heritage tourism. And you've done a little mental math, and you said 5,000 years of Indian heritage and history across your 32 properties. What's been your most satisfying project and the most challenging one?
I think you can't ask a mother which child do you like the most,
That's a tough question.
Okay. No, the truth is that it's like asking a painter which is your favorite painting. I think it should be the next one that you're doing. If Malika says, I've done my best dance 20 years ago, nobody's coming to watch her, So you have to be in the creative process, completely involved. And my family are refugees from Lahore. They had a splendid house. But the difference, I think, between the Punjabis and the Rajputs, if I may say, that the Punjabis live in the present, totally. I never heard my parents say, we left this behind, we had horses, or we had, badminton court, whatever the story was, till I went to Lahore. Then I came back and said, but you never told us we had such a splendid house. They said, Punjab was always invaded by this one and that one. Rajasthan too, but Punjab in a different sort of way. So if you've had the Greeks, the Scythians, the Huns, the Turks, the Afghans, everybody's come and raped everybody. So we become not the opposite of inbred. I don't know what that is. So we have the metal. Sorry, outbred? No. I'm not sure. No, but I mean to say that we have a different approach to life. So the one important thing which everybody should know, that India is the only continuously alive civilization in the whole world. That's not a small statement, you know. So if you think of Greece and Rome and Mesopotamia, the Incas, you know, everybody, they've come and gone. The Chinese were there, they had the Cultural Revolution, they also made a cut with the past. So, you know, when we say, kuch baat hai ki hasti mitti nahi hamari, you know, that sare jahan se acha thing, it's true. So, people like us represent that in a very wise way. It's not me, it's something that we are carrying through, and that is what heritage is about.
Just continuing on that thread, you and Bapchi were the founding members of INTACT. INTACT was inspired, as you described, by the British National Trust publication you encountered in East Grinstead in 1981. You being the youngest member, Bapchi convened the Rajasthan chapter.
He was a chairman.
But in this rapidly moving to today, because we're looking forward, in a rapidly urbanizing country like India, how can organizations like INTACT balance heritage conservation with the pressures of economic development without turning culture into a tourist asset?
You know, this happens to institutions, this happens to royals. People set up a plan, but things don't work to plan. You know, so I say that if 3 generations keep their head on their shoulder, which is difficult, an empire can be made. And if 5 generations can keep their head on their shoulder, a dynasty can be made. But if you look at the Hindu Trinity, which understands this whole business of life in a very wise way, because we are truly a wise country. If you look at Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, there's the creator, the preserver, because if one generation creates an extraordinary amount of wealth, to the second generation, it's not just an asset, it's also a liability, you know. If you had 100 trillion rupees or dollars or whatever, then you get into the trappings of all that. And the third generation then has to be decadent, and for them to keep that agility of the hunter to go out to the forest and hunt, you know, is lost. So that is nature's plan, in a way, fortunately, because otherwise one family would go on rising. But I forgot your question, though.
It's just like INTACT.
Sorry. No, INTACT, yeah. So the problem with setting up institutions is that they're very well intended, but it doesn't work out like that. And I think the best example you can take is the Taj Mahal. So I studied medieval Indian history. So Shah Jahan, with the far sight of whatever he'd built, he'd emptied his whole treasury, built this extraordinary thing, and whatever money was left, he made a basra chadar for the grave. So he says, how is this going to be looked after? So he writes 250 villages, you know, in a farman to say they are part of the Taj Mahal, and revenues from that will look after. But it doesn't work, even for an emperor of that size, etc. So a few generations later, the British are there. They're having dance parties, and they go with you know, hammers and chisels, and they're pulling out the semi-precious stones. So where is Shah Jahan and where is anything? So it's very difficult to get continuity, which is the reason that this book explains the complexity of the task ahead. And INTACT, I don't know what you would say about it. It's set up with this grand plan, but then people start, you know, sitting over elections, people, you know, start campaigning, everything falls to ruin in its own way.
Right. Bapchi, I'm just going to quickly talk about music. Your father, the late Hanwant Singh Ji, appointed Ali Akbar Khan as the court musician in 1943, gave him the title of Ustad. You dedicated an auditorium in his honor. You built 2 music festivals, the Rajasthan International Folk Festival at Mehrangarh, the Sacred Spirit Festival in Nagaur, that now draws, music lovers from across the world. We had the privilege of hosting the curtain raiser of the Jodhpur Riff at the Royal Opera House last year, and we had the Saz Trio who actually perform with us. Could you elaborate on the journey, how music in your family has gone from a private patronage to a public festival? And you all do more than music. Your patronage extends to the crafts and the visual arts. And how do you ensure that these traditions both stay culturally relevant but economically viable? Music and art and craft.
Last question, what?
It's about how music has gone from private patronage to a public festival, and how art and craft, you keep it relevant and financially viable, the cultural ecosystem.
Well, as you rightly said, father was very much into classical music, not grandfather. Grandfather was more into the local Marwari music. And our families have always been patrons of the arts, and particularly music. So it was nothing new. And having Ali Akbar was a great event in the family, because he not only trained members of the family, but other people in Jodhpur, and developed musicians who have carried on since then. My connection with, after coming back, is all integrated with the cultural evolution of the Mehrangarh Fort as a museum, to have it as a living entity, not just as a dead museum. And one of the things that I began to notice was that the patronage that had been there for the Langas, the Maniyars, the traditional folk musicians had died, and their music was suffering as a result of that. Not only because of not having enough outlets and patrons, whatever patronage they got now was from tourism. And with tourism, there was a lack of authenticity. Authenticity was going out. So it was both a question of getting authentic music out and providing a platform for the musicians that would get them known, get them better understood, and in order to get them more work and more revenues. And of course, Divya played a big role in that, in our setting up of RIF. And RIF was a great success, and the Sufi also came out of another conservation project. It was the Fort of Nagaur. We restored the Fort of Nagaur. And one of our benefactors, Lady Hamlin, she said that now we've come to a certain stage. I want the world to see it. And I will sponsor a music festival. And we chose Sufi because Nagaur is the second most important Sufi center of Rajasthan after Ajmer. The Sharif, and his disciple went to Nagaur. So we chose Sufi as the base of that. And that evolved, and then from Nagaur we took it to Jodhpur also. So both have been highly successful, and has given me a lot of pleasure, me and my daughter, my whole family, and has been much appreciated by the musicians here.
And I believe some of your artists are now going to be performing in New York in summer. But I'm just going to go to Yogi quickly. We spoke about how culture, it's more than music and art, holds a very deeper meaning for the Rathore clan. Could you elaborate on that, and perhaps also about that Safa exhibit at the Met?
Well, culture, it's been said, it's one of the most difficult words in the English language, because the origin was interpretations in different European languages. So basically, it started as a cultivation of something. Originally crops, animals, but as development came, it was a culture of the mind. And talking about the Rathores, Ranbanka was, what they were called, which is battle crazed. So, but those were the times, but it was at a heavy price. The first 14 of the 20 Rathore kings died on the battlefield. But culture is, I think, something which is left behind when everything else has gone. You know, it's your identity. And Babji, his father, his grandfather were Maharajas of peacetime. The wars had ended. So in peacetime, how do you preserve your identity? It's your music, your dress, your food. Yeah, and all that he's done, you know, the language. And yeah, that's culture. And the Safa, for instance, he said that I noticed that people, especially young people, stopped wearing Safas. So he said, I started wearing one. And you know what the Maharaja does, the Praja follows, right? So that's a custom tradition. He says a lot of people started wearing, especially for ceremonial occasions. And then of the many artifacts, like Mehrangarh Museum, you know, 1 million footfalls, 60 million archival documents have been digitalized, all his effort. You know, this is preserving culture. Because this is, he says, this is my legacy I inherited, and I must pass it on and preserve it. There are so many instances where things have been lost, you know. So this was very important, and I think very creditable to what he's done.
I think at many of your book launch events, you've been wearing Safas, and I thought you'll be sporting one today. But I'm just going to start wrapping up with one last question for Aman, and then we'll have to open it up. Sujata, how much time do I have? Oh, I do? Okay, good. I have many more questions. So don't run away. And whoever the gentleman or lady who has cell phone reception, you're very lucky. But could you put your phone on mute? That ringtone was also quite nice to start with. But you know, the authors plan to take Babji and Hemlata ji to Poonch for the first time, and then the war intervened. You know, writer's plan, life declines. That journey, had it happened, would have been one of the most resonant chapters in the book. Why did you want them to go there? And how do you look back at this incomplete chapter?
That's a brilliant question, because actually what sparked the book for me was that. One day I was having tea with Babji, and you know, everybody asked, where did you find your wife? How did you meet, etc. So it's an absolutely extraordinary story. When Babji went to the UK to study, you know, so the government had to put a regent there. So Thakur Jaikriti Singh was made the resident. He retires, and he goes to Dehradun, of all the places, and he buys a house or rents a house. And his immediate neighbor is a Rajmata of Poonch, so which happens to be the grandmother of the Maharani Sahiba. So he used to say, you know, there's this nice boy, he should get married. But for most of us, which is why when you get the book, you'll understand what Marwar means, you know. There are 269 thikanas under it. It's got, I think 40% of it has gone to Pakistan. It's
95% Rajputs.
Yeah. So it's like a huge chunk of land. So one day he's walking with your grandmother, and they used to go for a walk in the evening, and he's got a cane, and he stops her, and he draws a circle on this. Sorry?
She was. Aman, you've not read the book.
No. I was. Okay, it was her. Oh no, but he was telling her, and she said, "I'd heard about this crash, I knew about this kid, etc." So anyway, so he says, "This is Marwar," and he puts a pin in the middle, and he says, "This is Poonch." So making a point that, you know,
why are you hesitating?
Why are you
Why
hesitating?
don't you say yes?
So that was sparked it, and then there were other connections. There was Khimsar, there was a family, and that wedding happened. So I thought that was a fascinating story, and that dream isn't given up. And the joke is that she has never been to Poonch, and he has also never been to Poonch. So I thought, this is not possible. You know, I know them so well. They can't have such lack of curiosity. So after much planning, and she said, you know, I don't like hill roads. I think I feel cold. I said, you go to Europe, you know. So she made all the excuses, and then we got set up the whole thing. We went there before, and then this Pakistan war started, I said, something's on their side. But we went, we've covered it, and that's a chapter that you will really enjoy. It's a beautiful palace. It's got, her grandfather's bed and so on. So it's got lots of things.
I have to thank Aman for this. Because Aman and Yogi both, to bring in the whole Punj chapter. They went out of their way and stitched that in. It's a very important chapter to be put into the book. And fortunately, we couldn't make that visit, but we'll do it. We'll still do it. We'll still do it.
I think you should do a small book event in Poonch, just to celebrate that. But, I'll just start wrapping up with a few questions. Just before that, and I love the quotes in the book, Napoleon Bonaparte said, there's no such thing as an accident, it is fate misnamed. Your family, unfortunately, has endured a lot of tragedies across generations, from your untimely loss of your grandfather, your father, the accident for your son. So when you look back at these adverse moments, what beliefs and values have helped your family endure these trials and maintain the strength and resilience through these difficult times?
Well, I certainly believe that there is a legacy, and I was fortunate to be born into that legacy. And that gives us a strength of continuity. We have a responsibility to that legacy, and hence we have to carry it on, whatever the circumstances. And that helps us to regroup and take life further. And in the case of my son, we had the prayers of all the people of Jodhpur and around the world. And it put my son on his feet again. He got married. We have a grandson and a granddaughter. And the legacy continues.
And the granddaughter is written in the book also. Speaking about legacy, the book's dedication says legacy is not what you inherit, but what you leave behind. You inherited 39 generations of history. You've added your own golden chapter to it. So when you look back at what you have built, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of the fact that people today, they recognize me. And they appreciate what I'm trying to put across. And in fact, they also have grasped the importance of their own heritage, their own culture, and their own history. And I find that it's very rewarding.
Wonderful. I know Aman wants to add. He's looking at me. We are almost out of time, but before I go to the audience questions, I'm going to ask each of you, Aman and Yogi, to share some quick closing thoughts. Yogi, you want to start?
I don't know. It's everybody said what a fabulous this. It was effortless. So I really feel the foundation was friendship, 120 years, trust, faith. So it was a joy to do this book. And when we are talking about teamwork, the lesson was to leave the ego out. Aman and I really never. And teamwork, there is. Shehnaz, are you still here? Or you've left? I think she's. Can you please stand up? She was our editor and she did a fabulous job. So you met her. Aman and I want to acknowledge, we called her Hawk-eyed Shehnaz. She was the comma police. This not here, this not. But teamwork. So that was my take, that when you work together with no egos, you get something like this.
Congratulations, Shehnaz. Closing thoughts?
I thought you told me that I'd spoken too much.
You did, but that's not.
Okay. I think that whatever you do in your lifetime, I'm talking now about this book, should be something that nobody can better in their life. So when I do books, when I did the Tata Centenary book, Ratan Tata said that he gives it out to people. It's considered the best corporate book in the world. It's good to hear that. And this will be, I think, the most extraordinary biography, because it's completely unput-downable. It doesn't go on with fine print. It's designed and written in a way that most people don't read, and you're guilty of that. But you look at the pictures and you look at the captions. So the captions have this sprightly text. So if you see the pictures and read the caption and you get drawn into it, then you will read it. So we've made it very readable, and That I think is the success story of a large format book, even if it's unwieldy, but it has plates which open up.
I know, I agree with you. It's a wonderfully produced book, and kudos to Mappin and their team for doing this. The gatefold, the images, the old images, and even what Amit has done. And yeah, we should. Why don't you give him a shout out?
No. So Amit Pasricha is discreet and does the most wonderful work. Yes. If nothing else, even if you're illiterate, you can buy the book because you can see the pictures. They're so splendid. And they bring Marwar to your house. And you understand the scale, the beauty, everything of the book.
And I agree about the book being unput-downable. I spent my weekend with the book instead of my family. But now we're going to start taking some audience questions. And we're going to request you to keep the questions and not statements, so we can take a few. And please don't ask this charming moderator any questions, just in the interest of time. Any hands going up?
Yeah, I have a question, and this is for the authors and publisher. And I hope it's taken in the right spirit. It's being asked, I'm a fan and friend of Babji, so I'll ask this question with, when I look at the cover, I'm sure the book is great. But when I look at the cover, I don't see Babji on it. I see Umaid Bhawan, and I say, why is Babji not on the cover?
He's on the cover.
He is there. He's small. You have to look down.
No,
sorry.
No, that is the point.
I think, yeah, that's the whole point of the book, that we are bringing him down. It's a human story. The crowns have gone, the titles have gone officially. His identity is still, of course, Maharaj. But this is that he's achieved so much more just being an ordinary
as a human
man,
being,
like a human being, That was the whole idea. So you put him on the cover with jewels and all. That was out of sync completely with the...
with a Marwari horse and Babji, that would have gone beautifully, in my view.
We have a whole chapter on the Marwari horse.
Lovely. Great.
Hi. So it's really not a question. It's my birthday, so I'm really thankful. This is one of the coolest gifts that I've got, and I'll really remember it. And my friends were like, you're going for a book launch. I said, yeah, I'm going to meet a person, and I've heard stories about the polo accident, and I'm like, I'm intrigued I'm a dentist. So I'm intrigued as to how he came out of it, and now he made an example. And it's such a wonderful medical wonder that, you can come out of a serious accident and just live your life and have your life back. So I'm really glad, and it's a wonderful gift, sir, to meet you. So thank you.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And yes, indeed, my son was an example. And if you take him from a grade of 1 to 100, he was from 2. Today he is 95.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you.
Babji, Gana Khammi. Gani Khamma.
Got it wrong.
This is coming out of the anxiety, this is coming out of the emotional thing, because 30 years before, Babji, you have given me the best drawing competition award in Jodhpur. My Janmabhoomi is Jodhpur, and you have put the hand on my head and said, "Tum bahut unnati karoge." And my Karma Bhumi is Bombay, where I am right now. And one thing which has remained with me, and it's a very emotional day going back to those 30 years, and I have that still the photo with me, a drawing competition which has been awarded by you. And our roots are in Jodhpur, and being in Bombay, still always feel one thing, which Babji, I want to understand from you is, how do we as community, as born in Jodhpur, continue to contribute despite being our Karma Bhumi in Mumbai?
Well, you can always remain in touch, one form or the other. I'd love to meet you when you come to Jodhpur. As I said, Jodhpurians have always remained in constant communication, and I hope that the doors are open. And there are a number of activities that my foundations are doing, and if you would like to be involved in that, you're most welcome.
Sure. My one takeaway is I'm going to learn now Marwadi after 40 years, for sure. While my grandparents have continued to use the language while having an intercommunication between them, but they always spoke to us in Hindi. But I'm sure with my next generation, I'll give them back the Marwadi language.
And start wearing a safa.
Thank you.
Good evening, Babji sir. I have grown up listening to a similar story at home of my paternal aunt who married a Maharaja. And it was a very raw emotion. He must be around 85 or more than that. And yet, every time I sense that emotion. And it's a very similar story wherein he had to leave Cambridge, come back and take over at the age of 19. And it was around this Privy Purse time. The emotion was raw. I know it must be in the book, but what was your emotion at this particular time? I mean, we know about the resilient Maharanis, and there's a lot of revival also in interest in the lives of the Maharajas and the other side of it. Can you just tell us what did you feel at that tender age to kind of make sense of what was happening around you?
Well, I always knew I had to come back. This was the conditioning that I had received from my mother and my grandmother, that my commitment and my connections were the people of Marwar and the people of Jodhpur, and whatever privilege I had been born into was on account of that. And I had to come back and perform my duties, whatever they were, in whatever way. Of course, the political conditions had changed, but yet that responsibility remained. So for me, it was a foregone conclusion that I return and take care and look after the situation as they were and as they evolved, which is what I did.
I think we're going to take one last question. I think the mic reached there or not? Because we've not asked anybody. Okay, there. All right. Gentleman with the hat.
Yeah. Ram Ram, sir. Sir, Babji, I am basically from Rajasthan, but born and brought up in Andhra Pradesh. In my childhood, my grandmother used to say that when your Chachaji was born, in the same hospital, Gaj Singh Ji was also born. I really wanted to see you, and that's why I'm here. I have no questions for you. I just wanted to see the royal person that you are.
I'm very glad to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, this is...
You'll have to crawl into a cradle, I think. Yes.
I think to wrap up, I mean, this has been a conversation not just about legacy, but what it means to carry history forward with purpose and humanity. And thank you to these distinguished trinity of gentlemen for their insights and reminding us that legacy is as much a conscience as an inheritance. And now we're going to invite Malika Sarabhai to come and do the official vote of thanks on behalf of MAPN.
Before that, Malika, may I thank you and the publishers, MAPN, our authors, Ashish, you, and most of all, the audience who've taken the effort to be here and come out. All my friends, thank you.
Dear friends, Babji, Maharani Sahiba, my two writer friends, Asad and NCPA. It was 1979, and a friend, Ashok Advani, came to fetch me at the airport. I was coming back from a China that was changing, and he said, "You're very interested in design. There's a magazine that you have to take over tomorrow." And that was Inside Outside. I knew nothing about publishing. I was fascinated by design, by craft, by conversations. That was 79. In 1982, nobody would spend, please sit down, nobody would spend 10 rupees for a magazine which had 75 color pages. And I had a wonderful assistant editor, Naomi Menezes, and she said, you know, there are lots of Indians abroad, and for them it's $1. Let's try and market it abroad. So I went abroad, and somebody had given me the name of somebody who was working with Pfeffer and Simon, who wanted to start his own marketing company. So I went and we had a meeting, and that was Bipin Shah. I repatriated him to India, gave up Inside Outside, and we started MAPN Publishing with one dream. which was that we did not want India to be interpreted for Indians by foreigners. And at that time, every book on India was some journalist coming and picking the brains of somebody who had spent their life doing a craft or an art, who couldn't write English or couldn't speak English, and thanking them in one sentence, having stolen their life's journey in the craft and saying that it was the author who had written it. We are now 450 books old. I'm sorry Bipin is not here. Bipin is the one who's worked closely with Babji. But I remember people laughing at us when we set out the dream to hold India's legacies for all future generations by making not coffee table books, Bapuji, but by drawing the lay person, the lay Indian into our wonderful heritage, by showing them beautiful photographs with captivating captions that would then want them to look at what the book was. And the aim was never to try and create books for academia. The aim was for every young Indian woman to be wearing embroidery, to be wearing block prints. I'm talking of a time when bell-bottom jeans was the fashion. I think we have been part of the same journey. Aman and I go back 40 years. He was one of our first authors. And I just want to say that there are so many of us who have the same dream for the culture of this country. And I want to thank all of you here who carry that dream forward, who believe that there is something beyond the hatred that we are covered with today in India, something that has to survive. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, NCPA, for hosting this. Thank you all for carrying this forward. The book is not available here. You can go to the Mappin website, or there is outside a QR code that you can immediately buy the book and it will be delivered to you. Thank you. Thank you for being part of this.
Thank you very, very much. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you. Good night.